Welcome to La Louisiane, conversations brought to you by the official magazine of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. I'm managing editor Marie Elizabeth Oliver. Today, we're at the Hilliard welcoming Janet Begneaud, the sister of Robert Rauschenberg, and Molly Rowe, executive director at the Hilliard Art Museum. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Well, you're so welcome. I'm actually, my experiences with Bob are, I guess, my fondest memories.
You know, we're here celebrating him at the centennial, 100 years since he was born.
Yeah, yesterday was his birthday.
His birthday. So how do you think he'll be remembered by history? And Molly, maybe you can chime in after. How is Robert Rauschenberg, the artist, do you see him being remembered?
Bob was always in a good mood, and I think that that part of the way that he'll be remembered was the fact that he was always really involved in whatever was going on,
Mm-hmm.
And if it was not too very interesting, then he figured out how to make it more interesting, And it was really fun doing shows and all with him.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's kind of goes without question that Bob Rauschenberg was one of, if not the seminal figures in American art in the second half of the 20th century. If we look at what we have in our collection here, which is right behind us, I think you see his legacy, which is at the time was so radical and today is seen as, part of how we look at art. And that is that there's things such as media and memory and place and dance and printing. They're not separate things. He looked at them as interconnected.
Yes.
And all being part of one narrative, one project. And I think for us at museums, that is his most important legacy. Mm-hmm. And we follow it. It is our North Star as we think about how we program an institution, specifically one tied to a university, that we're not, we're not over here as a distinct entity, but we have to be connected to all of these other disciplines, all of these other ways of thinking. And I think that Bob Rauschenberg, that was what he did naturally, and what he taught us to do was to think in that way.
So what about in Lafayette? We're so curious. Molly and I were looking at this piece a little closer, looking at the autobiography and the lines of his life and, specifically calling out Lafayette, Louisiana and, you, which I'm sure he associated this place with you and your parents. What do you remember about him when he was here or what he kind of thought about this place? We're so curious.
Oh, he loved it. He really, really enjoyed Lafayette. And he came every year for Mother's birthday, which was the beginning of December. And but he usually wouldn't stay for Christmas. He'd have some other thing that he really needed to get to. So he would kiss Mother goodbye and go do whatever it was he was going to do. But one time he said, I want to do some photographing. He said, you could drive me. So I thought, well, he'll want to take like advantage of an oak and stuff. He'd stop. He said, "Stop!" And I said, "What do you see?" He said, "I like that right there." And it was just a pile of oil bins. It looked like garbage.
And it was here around Lafayette when you were driving around here?
Yeah, it was out by the airport. And so I had to back up, and he got out the car and did some, photography there. And I noticed everything that he was interested in shooting was something that you wouldn't even think of taking a picture of.
You just saw the world in a different way.
Yeah, he did. He really did. And he also, I guess with the exposure I had with him, makes it makes me see things differently.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm.
not always the way you were looking at it when you were young.
Right, right.
That everything has a perspective, and he was
Yeah.
encouraging us to look
Yeah.
at things
Yeah.
differently. That's really beautiful.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, especially here when the things that get attention, like you said, the Evangeline Oak, or the things that get a lot of attention here, we kind of look at the same
Yeah.
things over and over again, but he kind of zeroed in on things totally different.
And several friends, time to time when Bob was here, would have a gathering, and Bob was just so at ease and having so much fun, and he would tell stories that no one of us had ever heard, and sometimes I thought he just made them up. And he may have, which would have been all right, but
He was entertaining everyone.
he loved it. And we all loved him. It was really, really sad for him to go, but yesterday was his 100th birthday. And so we went out to dinner and at Emanuela's, and so they served us a little piece of chocolate cake with a candle lit in it. So we made a wish for him and blew the candle out, and we sang happy birthday.
Well, if you're just joining us, this is Marie Elizabeth Oliver, managing editor for La Louisiane, and I'm here with Janet Begneaud and Molly Rowe here at the Hilliard Museum. So I'd love to talk a little more about just the fact, kind of what you were just saying about how, he always looked at something different. And I don't know, Molly, if you, looking at his art and his perspective, how did that kind of come out in the work that he did, if you kind of noticed anything?
Well, one of the pieces that was really hard to drag around to different shows, but he did, was a mud pit about the size of this rug.
Wow.
And the sides of it was about this tall, and it was full of some type of mud that you couldn't see through, and it was really, you stand there and it go bloop, bloop. these bubbles would come up.
Wow.
Mud bubbles?
In different places, and it's amazing how entertaining something like that is, because you just get there thinking, it's like you're wishing another bubble would come up somewhere,
And I would imagine you never looked at another mud puddle the same way.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
But
It reminds me of like the way children kind of look at the world too. And like you were saying, he
That's right.
never lost that childlike wonder.
That's right. And but it's just like his piece, the goat, the the way that happened to me was crazy. This is when he was first in New York, and he had to walk a lot. He didn't have a car. Of course, hardly anyone has a car in New York. But in going to the particular spots that he frequented, he kept going by this stationery store, and way in the back of the store was a ledge of some kind, and this goat was up there, and which you have no reason in the world for a
Taxidermy
Angora goat
yeah.
to be in a
Stationery
store. And but anyway, Bob kept seeing that goat, and so he stopped him one day and he asked him. He said, "How much would it cost me to get that goat?" And the guy told him. He said, "Well," he said, I need to get rid of it anyway," and he gave him a price. And Bob didn't have any money anyway, but he said he said, tell me how much the minimum you would take. And so the guy thought for a little while, and he said, well, at least a couple hundred. And so Bob went back the next day, and he had $35. And he said, would you take $35 for the goat? And the guy said, yes.
Wow.
And so he took a goat, and some way or another he got it back to his apartment. And he did a lot of work on the goat, like, painting his face and whatever. And then he set him on a piece of art of his that had roller skate wheels at the four corners. And so the goat could move that, But
And that's that piece is
it's
very,
it's
famous.
unbelievable. It's not even for sale anymore. But how would anybody stop and want to know if you would sell a goat like that in a furniture store? I mean, it was just so ironic. But
He saw the world differently.
Yeah.
He saw everything differently.
That's right.
And Molly, like you were saying, those combines, just the fact that he was able to put all these things together and make one piece that I'm sure paved the way for
layering things in a way that people had not layered before. And I think that's
right.
so interesting, layering things, both in his artworks and in his ideas, how they were layered and intersecting. Those are the few words that I think about whenever I think about him is layer, intersection, collaboration, the words that we talk about today, but were not spoken about so much whenever he was creating and thinking about how someone leads the way with that. Connection, that's another word I think about.
Well, and especially since things like that had never been done before.
Absolutely.
And
brave. You have to be brave to be that creative and to put that out in the world.
Yeah.
I think speaking about connection too, if we think about Autobiography, which you gave to us, thank you. That is also connects us, right? At the museum, we think first about how are we rooted in our community, in our region here, and how can our roots tie us to the rest of the world? So thinking really regionally and putting that in dialogue with everything else. And if we even just think about this one piece, how that also connects us to so many other things. Like right now, as we're sitting here right now, this piece, Autobiography, is being exhibited at the Whitney Museum of Art, the San Francisco Museum of Art. Yeah. There's exhibitions all over the world celebrating Rauschenberg, and that we get to participate in that we're connected to these other institutions and these global conversations through a Rauschenberg piece that is in our permanent collection. That is a true privilege and an honor.
It's I was just thinking of one piece that he had mother involved with. Excuse me. And it's, I believe it's called Hiccup, and it's at the Begneaud. And
they have an incredible show.
Yeah, I think they own it. But there are all of these little fabric pieces about this square, and they each one painted something, and then they zip to each other. And so there are all these zippers. And so he got mother to come out and sew zippers for him.
And she did?
Yeah.
So she contributed to that piece?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did they collaborate on any other pieces, or was that a unique situation?
Well, you've probably heard about this, but he did when he was at Black Mountain College, he did a portrait of the board was a piece of plywood. What is that, 4x8? And there's kind of a smooth side and a rough side. He used the smooth sign, and he did a portrait of her name is Mildred, and nude, of course. She's very voluptuous. She covers the whole 4x8
The whole panel.
piece of, and but she's also nude. And my mother she just cannot understand that, you know. And
And when would have been? When he was at Black Mountain in the
yeah, and some way or another that got shipped to her house, and she was kind of horrified.
This is like in the 50s, about in the 50s.
And yeah,
Yes.
what she did was she put it in his closet upstairs and put the face of it against the wall and down a good bit. So I mean, it was almost non-existent. And
So she hid it away.
yeah,
in the closet, turned around in the corner.
that's right. That's right. And so one time when he was here, and we were moms and talking about stuff, and she said, "I've been wanting to show you something." And so we all went upstairs. There was I don't know, 2 or 3 people with Bob, and we got upstairs and dug in the closet, just got moved all kind of luggage and everything, out of the way to get that piece out. And then she said like this. Now, she said, "Isn't this better?" She had painted a little yellow bra and a little yellow bikini bottom on that picture.
She had done that.
On his art. And
Well, I think that's a collaborative
I was
artwork
going
now.
to say, an
And so,
unintended collaboration.
he stood there for a minute and he said, she said, "Well, what do you think? What do you think?" And he said, she was nude, but now she's naked. And Mother looked at me and she said, "What, doesn't he see what I painted on it?" And I said, "Yeah, Mother, he sees." And that's the difference in nude and naked.
They had a different perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Now, is this the piece that I think I read about that she used to board the window? Is that the same one?
Yeah,
Can you
that's the
share
same-
that story
yeah.
with us?
That she had a couple of these big pieces, but this was a hurricane or something was coming, and she had her old house had a great big picture window in the front, and so the yard man was hanging. He found another piece of wood, pretty good size, in the garage, and so he's hanging. And Mother came and she said, "We have this," and he said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Let's use that." And Mother said, "Well, don't face her outside." She said, "I don't want my neighbors to see that naked lady." And so
So he boarded up the window with this
Yeah.
artwork.
So she had protected the storm
Yeah.
window.
Yeah. So his work is in some of the most famous museums, and she used it to board her
Yeah.
windows.
That's right.
That's a different perspective, Molly. I don't know if you can speak to this, but just when the museum first opened, it was about a year after, but having someone of his stature not only show his work here, but show up in the community. I mean,
Yeah.
what did that mean? I mean, I know you weren't here, but just having that part of the legacy of this space.
Absolutely. I mean, that show happened, I think, a little bit less than a year since it first opened. So I guess we're celebrating the 20th year of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it, for an institution of our size and at a university, it's something that is so special. It inspired so many students at the time. I believe he did a talk at Angel Hall, maybe with Tina Gerard, at that
Yeah.
moment too. And so to think in Lafayette, Louisiana in the early 2000s, we have a Rauschenberg show in conversation. And there's these conversations that are happening on our campus for our community. I mean, that is just simply incredible. And I think had a lasting impact on so many people here.
He did. He certainly did make a footprint when he was here. Most artists are they're creative and they're painting whatever. They're out there, and it feels good for someone else to like what you're doing and to relate to it. And Bob did that with a number of young artists.
It made them feel like their work was seen and it's
Exactly,
credible and it's worth
exactly.
continuing. I mean, there's
Like
always
it meant something.
yes, and that I can keep going. There's always artists. Always, it's hard to keep going, to continually put yourself out there, and to have someone like Bob Rauschenberg telling you this is good, keep going.
Mhm.
I mean, that I know for so many that meant so much. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons that so many artists are practicing here in Lafayette today.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, anything, that you, in thinking about your brother, thinking about the centennial, that you'd like for people to remember about him?
Most people who knew Bob and had at least a conversation with him would respect his view of the world. And that sounds kind of crazy for me to say that, but he saw things that everybody sees, but they don't. It doesn't relate to them as if they're seeing something.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
just like making a piece of art with the goat.
Yeah. Not a lot of people would think to do that, but they think about it after they see his work.
That's
Absolutely.
right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's sort of saying it's okay to do other things.
It's okay to think differently,
That's right.
and we should.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But he's well remembered by those that knew him for sure, because he was just such a happy person, and he was so much fun to be around.
So much fun. And that comes through in his
Yeah.
work. I mean, that lives on, and those experiences, even when people interact with his work here today, I'm sure you see people coming across this and they have their own experiences and it brings out
Absolutely.
emotions in them.
It's always on all of the educational tours, it's a very meaningful piece to stop and discuss, because it's accessible. There's images in it that are very accessible, and there's so many points of intersection. And you can't, as serious as the piece is, you also have to smile when you're looking at it. I mean, there's a man on skates with a parachute behind him. You can't. You have to smile when you look at that. Even
That's right.
So I think the importance of that. I mean, the center panel in Autobiography is the swirl of text that, if you're looking at it from away, it forms the mark of a thumbprint. And I think often here about the mark that he left on our community, that will be felt for generations.
He, no doubt, was a big piece of my life, and I miss him a lot.
Mm.
But then I have so many stories and memories of things that we did that I can relive those.
Carry those with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Happy birthday, Bob.
Yes, happy birthday.
Yeah. Yeah, we sang happy birthday last night.
Well, thank you so much, Janet. We're so grateful to you for being here and for sharing your memories with us.
A pleasure to
For
me.
sharing this
A
art with
pleasure.
all
Thank
of
you.
us.
This is so special for all of us.
Yes, and thank you, Molly, so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Maria Elizabeth.
And we appreciate you joining this conversation with La Louisiane, the official magazine of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette since 1989. Check back next month for more discussions with members of our university community. You can listen to an archive of this interview and read related articles by visiting louisiana.edu/magazine, or pick up a copy of the magazine around town. KRVS is listener-supported public radio for Acadiana, a service of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Thanks for listening.